What's going on, guys? This is going to be our Summer Markets Week 77. We're going to do things a little differently this week. I have added Qs to our watch list. I've also added USD JPY. I know a lot of you guys in the comments have been asking me to look at like forex. So I'll start adding a little bit of that to the watch list. I don't trade forex, but we'll take a look at that from now on. So we're going to start off with SPY, go into Qs, talk about gold, oil, USD JPY, and then we're going to go into crypto. So we're going to talk about Bitcoin and Ethereum. Then we're going to go into the watch list after that. But for this week, as you can see, my chart looks a little different. I know you guys are very interested in volume profile. We just got finished with our 5-part How to Trade Volume Profile series. So if you guys haven't checked that out, make sure to go check that out. But I know you guys are very interested in volume profile, so I'm going to start using volume profile more in this analysis for our weekly watch list. I'm going to start showing you guys kind of what levels I'm watching and what can make it be bullish or bearish, right? But all right, that's our introduction. Let's get started now. So started with SPY. You can see how we had a gap down on Friday. You're kind of losing this little value that we put in on Thursday. We did not go for that entire gap fill. We did fill a lot of it, so about half that gap has been filled, but we still have an open gap towards the high. So moving on for this week, that is the obvious bullish target, so around 440.70 cents. So we're going to go ahead and mark that out. If you guys are bullish throughout the week, that is the most important level you want to be watching. So keep an eye on that gap. And then starting on Monday, you can watch the value area low of Friday, the value area high, and then we have the POC. So slightly bearish. You can see the POC is down towards the value area low. We also have that B-shaped profile, so the bears were in control for most of that day. So if we want to be bullish here, we need to start seeing some value back above 438.82. Okay, and then if we can get above that level, you want to start looking for that high of day on Friday around 440, and then the 440.66 cents gap. Okay, so when you're looking at volume profile here, you want to look for very important nodes, like any resistance nodes that are above us. There's not a whole lot, but we can grab like this little node right here. And we can say there's a little bit of resistance right there, but not really anything that we should be worried about. So realistically, as long as it stays above this value area high, you should be getting your gap fill. Okay. Now, if we do break lower, we don't have any levels from these 2 days that we can really use as support, but we do have some levels on July 27th that we can take. So we can take like this support right here, and then we can also take this little node right here kind of below that support. So basically everything right here, let me extend this, is going to be support, okay? And then if we get below that, very likely going to come back down towards this little gap fill down there around 435. So if we break lower, watch out for 437, and then around 435.50 would be the overall target, all right? All right, let's move on to Qs. Basically the same thing. You got a gap down on Qs, so we can go ahead and grab that gap as your obvious bull target. And then once we start climbing above the value area high, that is where you want to start looking for that gap fill. And then we have the value area low in the POC. Kind of slightly a bullish day, even though you had a gap down. If we ignored the gap down, the way that this kind of hovered towards the top and you had a lot of volume towards the top of the day, that's actually slightly bullish. So it looks like it wants to try to go higher on Monday or Tuesday, but it has to maintain that like 360, 380 area, okay? So watch that gap fill. If we do break lower, we do have a value area high, which lines up with the value area low here, so I'm not going to mark that out, but just know that that is a key level on July 27th. And then we have the value area low way down here with that POC as well. So if we do break lower, you want to watch for the low of day on Friday, and then you want to watch for around that 361 area, okay? All right, moving on to gold. Because gold is more long-term, we are not going to do volume profile analysis on this. We're just going to do our standard analysis with the OTS, the 50-day moving average, and the MOMO. We're going to go to a daily here. As you can see, we're trying to fill in this gap right here, so it has to get back above like 1830, and then you're looking for around 1860. If we can hold above 1860, then we're talking about that 1900 to 1950 zone, okay? We also have a gap below us, so you gotta watch out for that. We are currently failing the 50-day moving average. So if we fail the OTS trail, let me actually fix that. This should be on circles here so we can see it a little better. If we fail the OTS trail here, look for that gap below us around 1800, and then if we fail that, you want to look for around 1770. Right now, the short-term momentum is trying to climb, and the long-term momentum is bouncing off that low. So if you can break above the 50 here, we could start to kind of curl back towards the highs. All right, moving on to oil here. Nice little V recovery, pivot at the bottom, recovered the 50-day, recovered the OTS trail. We have not flipped the OTS trail bullishly just yet. It has not flipped into a green trail. When that does happen, that will be a very bullish uptrend. We can see the short-term momentum on the Momo is climbing. Long-term momentum, not just yet because of that dip. But if this starts to climb this week, you should see that long-term start to catch up. So if we can break above like 75 here, there is a pivot, I believe. Where is that pivot? Yeah, right up here around 81, 82. And then we have another pivot around 86. So those would be the obvious targets. So keep an eye above this local top around 75. All right, moving on to USD JPY. It is pulling back a little bit. You're trying to put in a little bit of a double bottom. So it does show that the dollar is weakening overall, but you are trying to find support here. So if the dollar can bounce above the 50-day and then or break above the trail or above like 110.50, then we're starting to look a lot better. The reason I'm looking at USD JPY to kind of determine the dollar, I don't trade forex, but I was doing a lot of research on like what is the best forex pair to watch to determine if the dollar is getting stronger or not. And a lot of the articles and forums and stuff were all saying USD JPY was the best. And they said the other one to make sure you have strong confluence is Euro USD. So like if Euro USD is going down and USD JPY is going up, then the dollar is typically getting stronger. Now we could also look at something like Dixie, which we do a lot in the Discord. But Dixie is pretty slow overall. So I thought going over USD JPY would be a little bit more beneficial to you guys. But this is what I typically watch when I'm looking at dollar strength. I look at Dixie, and then I look at USD JPY and Euro USD. I put most of my weighting on Dixie though. But okay, so back to this. Getting a little weak below the 50-day, below the trail. If we can bounce back above that, then the dollar could be strengthening or the yen could be weakening. So keep an eye on that. If we lose this support around 109.34, very likely going to go back down to like 108, maybe 107. So the dollar would weaken down there. Okay, moving on to Bitcoin. If you guys remember, I've been preaching this for months now. I kept telling you guys to wait for that 50-day break on Bitcoin, and that would show you a nice little break of that downtrend, right? So we saw the 50-day break on July 21st, or sorry, 25th, excuse me. And then we also had the OTG bot give a daily buy signal. We had a bunch of supports break as well. So no matter what kind of trader you were, basically around like July 25th to July 26th, that accumulation was breaking, okay? So we broke the 50-day, broke the trail, buy signal, yada, yada, and now we're seeing that massive spike, right? If we go back to our old analysis that I was going over on the summary markets, you can see that we broke that downtrend. That was kind of the first warning sign that we were going to start pushing higher. The OTS went from red to green, which shows you that the downtrend is flipping into an uptrend, right? We broke the OTS trail, we broke the pivot. Those were all warning signs, right? And then we finally had the confirmation when we broke the 50-day, like I was telling you guys to watch out for that break. And then we saw the range high, okay? So if we can stay above the range high here, above 41,000, this accumulation is going to break out to the upside, okay? So hold above 41,000, then we're talking about like 47 to 50, and then if we can reclaim that, then we're talking about getting close to that all-time high, right? 60,000. All right, let's go back. Ethereum USD, basically the same exact thing. You bounced off the range low. Do we have that over here? Yes, we do. We have the range low. You actually bounced a little higher, excuse me. So you had a double bottom down here, bounced off the 75% retracement, and then we broke the 50-day, broke the trend, and then we just basically went straight up. So the difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin is, look at Bitcoin. We are actually above the range high here. Ethereum is still not above that range high. Okay, so we still have a little bit of ways to go. It is green on the OTS, so the uptrend is there, but we do have to get above that range high, above like 29, 3,000, and then we can start to push towards like 35 to 4,000. Right? There's not a whole lot of resistance up here, so if you can just find value above 29, you could easily retest these levels. Right? But okay, that is the summary markets. Let me push this button real quick. If you guys like the content, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe on YouTube. We are going to move on to our watch list. So the watch list has not really changed from last week or the week before. I'm still watching a lot of those companies that are related to COVID, related to kind of the lockdowns coming back, the mask mandates coming back, people going back to staying at home, stuff like that, right? I think it's going to be a little bit of a wild few months that we're going to see moving forward with all the Delta news and the COVID news. We're seeing hospitalizations and COVID cases spiking to even the peak of the pandemic in 2020, right? So some of those numbers are already being broken. Okay, so if those numbers continue, if the media continues to use this as like their fear porn, then these COVID companies will benefit. Okay, so keep an eye on them. We're going to get into those COVID companies in a sec. Let me go over some of these other companies. Neo looks really good, bouncing off the 200 EMA here, back above the 50. If you can get back above the trail here, this looks really good for a little downtrend break back into that pivot. So hold above like 46, probably get towards 50, 55 again. Snow, another one that looks good. So Snow, finally, this little orange line here, this is the 200 EMA. So we are just now finally putting in the 200 EMA, and we're actually above it. So it's very good. If we can hold above the 200, kind of let the 50 catch up and break the 200 here, get back above like 275, then we could easily see a 300 breakout, and then probably even around 320. Okay. Snapchat still holding after that earnings breakout. So as long as this holds above 70, this is most likely going to go higher. Look for like 80, 50, 82, 80, and then around 90. Okay. If it does come down, we do have a support around 68, and then look for that gap fill around 63. Docusign is one of those COVID companies that I was talking about. You had a nice little breakout here, mostly from earnings, and then probably just went up with the COVID fear. This looks like a weak high, so it does look like it wants to pull back deeper. Maybe go for this little gap fill down to like 277. Maybe retest the 50-day. But either way, a pullback on this would be pretty viable. So anything down around like 270, 260, I would definitely watch out for that. If it doesn't go for the pullback, stays above like 295, we could easily see 320 very soon. Moving on to Doordash. Doordash also has a weak high here. You tried to break out, put in a weak high, now we're pulling back. Also putting in a bear div on the Momo. You can see that, very obvious. It's trying to hold this pivot, but I just don't think it's got enough buyers to hold that. So most likely come back down to the 50-day, kind of around like 165. But if it does hold that 50-day, this could be a nice little bounce opportunity into earnings. Okay, so watch out for that. Another COVID company that actually hit our target already. We called this one out on, I believe, on the summary markets. We definitely called it out in Discord down here around 345 when it bounced off this little trend here, the 200 EMA as well. 50 moving average as well. So a lot of support right there. So it bounced off that. We were looking for this little trend here around 395. That hit perfectly, literally almost to the penny. And now we are pulling back a little bit. So this could pull back to the 50-day, probably around 360. But if this does go for the gap, or sorry, the trend break, we could easily be seeing like 450 pre-earnings or with good earnings. Okay, so definitely keep an eye on Zoom. Another COVID company is Fiverr. This one has earnings coming up, so they'd be a little careful. But this pivot retest here is beautiful. You have a nice little hammer right off that pivot. So if we can break this gap fill around 255 and then get back above like 260, we're talking about 280 very easily. And then with good earnings, very easily 300. Okay. Another COVID company is 3M. They make masks and a bunch of other things. They had earnings, didn't have the greatest reaction, but didn't really have a bad reaction either. So if this breaks this little downtrend that it's in, kind of from the high, you could easily see a pop to like 207 and then probably around like 219. Okay, so watch out for that. Another COVID company is Chegg. If Chegg can break this like 90 resistance, you could see like 95, and then the pivot around like 105 would be the overall target. This is putting in a weak high. So we do have a little weak high here with low momentum. So very likely could pull back in earnings. But if they have good earnings, I would watch for that pivot around 105. Shopify, another really big winner recently, the past few weeks. This had a weak high as well. So you tried to break out, couldn't stay above that high, and you can see bear div coming in. So if it can hold here, it doesn't look too bad because that bear div has played out. If it holds above the pivot, holds above like 1500, probably get 1600 again, break above 1600, look for 1740. You did have earnings, didn't have the greatest reaction, so watch out for that. If it does pull back, there's a lot of support around 1400. Teladoc, another COVID company here, it's just struggling to get back above the 50, and there's a lot of resistance here around like 157. If it can hold above 157, then we're talking about like 171. Etsy was looking really good. We broke out of our trend here. We hit our 205 target, but it just could not hold above that 205. You can see it put in a weak high as well. Massive bear div on the Momo. So we're seeing this on a lot of companies last week. They tried to break out, but their momentum just wasn't there. Okay, so I'd watch out for that. They do have earnings coming up. They mainly nuked because Pinterest had really bad earnings. So if you look at Pinterest, they typically follow Pinterest. And Snapchat. Snapchat had good earnings, so it pushed them higher, but then Pinterest had bad earnings, so it nuked it. You can see here, Pinterest had a really bad earnings result, so that pulled back Etsy. So with how bad Pinterest was, I'd be a little careful playing this in earnings, but after earnings, if this thing can stay above like 205, we're looking at like 235, okay? Moving on to Roku, another one with a weak high. Put in a weak high here, bear div, pulled back. You do have earnings coming up, so I probably wouldn't play this until earnings. But if it does have good earnings and you can hold above 460, this very easily is going to go to all-time high. It's kind of putting in like a cup and handle right now. So any pullback into this little handle zone is okay, even if it has bad earnings. If it pulls back and stays above, I'd say like the 50-day, anywhere above like 390, this is very buyable into like 500, 520. Okay, so watch out for that. Comcast, another one that I'm keeping an eye on. You can see it has a massive ascending triangle here. Very, very clean on the weekly. Little bit of a momentum loss on the weekly, but it does look like it's starting to pick up a little bit. If it can hold above this ascending triangle here and break above like 59.50-ish, we're talking about seeing like 61 to 63. And that's not too far away, but Comcast is not a very fast mover. So keep an eye on that. Lulu, this one has just been smashing all of our targets. I've been going over this on the summary markets for the past, like, I don't know, month or so. This thing just keeps hitting our targets. So any pullback on Lulu above like I'd say 80 is very bullish. And if we can break above this like 402, 405 kind of ascending triangle here, you're looking at like 415 to 425. Okay. Square, another one that put in a weak high. You can see this high right here, put in a very weak high, bear div. Pulled back below the trend. You are holding a little bit of support. So if this can pull back and kind of maintain above the 50-day, above like 235, I think this could bounce and go higher, especially with Bitcoin doing very well. Okay, be careful with the earnings though. Another one that I liked a lot, and I actually bought some of this for my long-term portfolio, was PayPal. It looked much better on Thursday, when we had that 50-day bounce, bounced off the pivot, bounced off the 618. A lot of supports kind of lined up with that area. So I bought that dip. I bought only half the size that I want to be in right now. I was going to put the other size in if it held above the pivot, but it just didn't do that, so I didn't put the other half in. I'm probably going to wait until it retests this pivot around like 270-ish. If it can come down here, I'll put the other half in, making my average somewhere around where it is now. Around 275-ish, and then we're looking for a gap fill around like 300, and then maybe even a breakout to like 329. Chewy is another one that I liked, but it just gave us a fake out. So you had, I think it was an upgrade. It got upgraded, and then it tried to bounce after that little nuke, but it just didn't have enough buyers, so it's pulling back again. So it's really struggling around this resistance here that kind of formed this range high. You can see resistance, resistance, all the way back here, resistance. So definitely struggling. But if it can hold above the 200 EMA and the 50, this thing is most likely going to rip higher to at least 100, maybe even like this gap around like 112, 115. So keep an eye on that. Could see another pullback though. All right, last but not least, let's go over big tech. So let me actually delete all these levels. We were doing some analysis for our how to trade volume profile videos. So we still have not hit our final target, but if it can stay above this gap around, what is that, 281, we will get to our final target. So just watch that. It's putting in a weak high. You can see it tried to break out. There's no momentum though. A very strong bear div. So very likely could pull back, fill that gap, and then try to push higher to like 293. All right. Let me delete these levels on Apple. So Apple, we actually had, let me just do it this way. We actually had a trend break. So we have this trend here that's holding. But then if we take this trend here, we broke that one. And then we also had like a little trend kind of forming right here that we broke as well. But pay attention mainly to these two trends. So we have this one retesting as resistance, and then this one is still acting as support for now. So as long as you can hold above the OTS trail, hold above the trend, which is around like 144, 143-ish, we probably will push higher back to like 148, 150, but it has to maintain that level. Make sure you're watching out for dividends. We do have dividends, if TradingView is accurate, around August 6th, so it might pull back a little bit on dividend day. Facebook, you went for the pivot test, almost a perfect bounce off the pivot. We did not fill the gap, so the gap is slightly open around 351.50. If we can come down to fill that gap, that would be better. But we do also have a massive gap above us around 373. So watch out for those levels. If it can bounce off this pivot here, that's the obvious target. If it doesn't bounce, then watch for that gap fill. Below the gap fill, watch the 50-day around 342. All right, moving on to Netflix. We're still holding the pivot, holding the 50-day, holding the 200 EMA. So still a lot of support down here. We hit our first target around 525. We didn't hit our 530 target. I'm still holding this in my long-term portfolio. If we can break above like 522, we're looking for 530 and then 549. If it breaks below the 200-day, then that's going to be very weak, and we probably could go down to like 490, 480. Excuse me. Let's move on to Amazon. So Amazon, if we take this initial impulse here, we did hit our targets originally, and then we saw a pullback to the breakout point. Then we saw resistance on the target again, putting in a lower high. And now look at where we pulled back. We pulled back to the penny almost, to that 618 of the original impulse. So this is clearly a fib that a lot of people are watching. So as long as we can hold that 618, which is around 3,300, and hold the 200 EMA around 3250. This can bounce here. This wouldn't be too bad of an area for like long-term investing. Obviously, anywhere between like the 50-day and the 200 EMA, this is a pretty good area for long-term investing. So this is not too bad, but if it does get below the 200, then we're looking for probably around 3,000. But this gap is most likely going to be filled. Amazon fills most of its gaps. So the obvious target would be around 3,600. A lot of resistance around like 3480. Moving on to Tesla, it's just been ping-ponging between our levels here, 628, 666, and 689. These levels have not changed for a long time, and it's reacting beautifully to all these levels. So if we can get above 689, then we're talking about 711, and then probably that gap fill, which is way up here around 737. Okay, so watch out for that. That would be triggered by a hold above 690. If we break back below 666, then we're talking about 640 to around 630. All right. All right, guys, that is the summary of markets. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Make sure to hit that like button if you guys didn't like the video. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube. And once again, if you guys are looking to learn more about volume profile, how to trade volume profile, I just finished an entire series last week. It was a 5-part series. It's over, I think, like 5.5 to 6 hours long. So there's tons of content. I go over a bunch of live walkthroughs. So make sure you guys check that out. That's in my How to Trade playlist. Okay. I'll see you guys tomorrow for our live trading session and our analysis at 3 p.m. Eastern. Peace out, guys.